Welcome back to the Reading and Writing Podcast. My guest today is Stephanie Wrobel, author of the new novel, This Might Hurt. Wrobel's debut novel, Darling Rose Gold, was a USA Today and international bestseller. Stephanie, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks so much for having me.
Sure. Well, if someone listening hasn't yet heard about your new novel, This Might Hurt, how would you describe the novel?
So it's the story of three women, and two of them are sisters, Natalie and Kit Collins. They haven't spoken in 6 months because Kit's been away at this self-improvement retreat called Wisewood on a private island off the coast of Maine. And when the book starts, Natalie gets an email from an account at Wisewood saying, "Would you like to tell your sister what you've done, or should we?" And so that sends her into a panic and gets the ball rolling. She heads to Wisewood to come clean to her sister Kit and try to bring her home.
Interesting. Well, do you remember the original idea that led you to write This Might Hurt?
Yeah, it was a fascination with cults, which has been, seems to be a theme for a lot of people, but wanting to get inside the head of people who join them, of people who lead them, that was really the impetus for the book.
I have to say I'm one of those people who are fascinated. I have been for years. I'm just curious. I mean, in your research and your thinking about it, did you have any insight into why people do join cults?
Yeah, I was trying to find commonalities, personality traits, whatever, in between all of them, from real life cults. And I didn't find any personality traits. The only thing I found was that they're all searching for deeper meaning in their lives, more purpose. They're all kind of looking for something to belong to. And actually that made the job easier because, who among us hasn't at times been looking for deeper meaning or, felt a little lost, like we could use some guidance. So yeah, it was quite illuminating because I think we tend to view people who join cults as naive or foolish but that I think is because most of the stories we hear about cults are at the height of their zaniness. You hear about the uniforms and the rituals and all of that, but less so is discussed, that these communities often start out as innocuous, social groups, religious organizations, whatever. Nobody says, would you like to sign up for a cult,
Sure. And I'm curious, do you have any favorite real life cults or not favorites, but one that you're particularly fascinated with?
Yeah, the People's Temple still is, I think, the standout for me. Just Jim Jones himself was such a fascinating character. And the fact that he was able to get 900 people to move to another continent and eventually commit suicide. Of course, it's tragic, but it's also, I was just so interested in how he was able to pull that off.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, the opening scene of This Might Hurt is extremely intense. I'm curious, when you were working on the novel, was that scene always there, or did you add that later when you were editing the finished novel?
No, I don't know if it was there in the first draft, but certainly for the majority of the story's development, it was always in the opening. I think it's definitely the most gruesome scene in the book, so perhaps it doesn't give a fair reflection of what's to come. I don't think anything else is nearly as horrifying. But it's an attention getter, you have to say that much.
Yeah, absolutely. Great. Well, not to give any spoilers away, but I'm curious, when you started working on the novel, did you know already how you were going to end it?
Well, the first draft, it changed a lot. So the plot changed, entirely. I had those three main characters, that are still there, but certainly that changed. But yeah, I tend to know, if not the exact ending, at least, pretty much where the characters are going to end up before I start writing. I find it helpful to have a direction that I'm moving toward.
Sure. And what is that process like for you? Do you write an extensive outline? Is it, a couple of pages, or are you just thinking about it in your head? How does that work for you when you're starting to work on a new novel?
I take a lot of notes, both by hand and just in a Word doc. I keep like a novel journal type thing where I can work through issues. When it gets to a point where I'm ready to plot things out, I start pretty macro at the beginning, middle, and end. But before I start drafting, I like to have a 1-sentence summary for each chapter. And I use Scrivener for that because I like the sort of corkboard like index card view. I like the visual representation of one card for each chapter. I'm just a visual thinker, so that helps a lot.
Sure. And do you actually write in Scrivener? I've never used it, but I'm familiar with what it is, or do you just use it for the organization?
I just use it for the organization and for plotting. I just write in good old-fashioned Microsoft Word. One document per chapter helps me kind of keep things from getting too chaotic. I won't like work in, the master doc until I'm to the point where we're just at copy edits and stuff like that.
Got it. Well, what was your initial writing journey that led you to writing and getting your debut novel, Darling Rose Gold, published?
So I was a copywriter before I wrote novels. I worked at a few advertising agencies. So that really influenced, of course, my novel writing as well. You really learn the art of concision when you're writing headlines for billboards and things like that, where you can't even have, an extra letter. But then, I was between jobs in copywriting, and I had always wanted to write novels, but it just seemed like an sort of impractical dream or career. Once I felt like I had nothing to lose, I applied to this MFA program at Emerson College because I had no formal creative writing training before then. And so I gave myself 2 years, wanted to come out of that with a finished novel or as close to it as I could. And that thesis ended up becoming Darling Rose Gold, which was my debut.
Hey, this is Jeff, the host of the Reading and Writing podcast. Thanks again for listening to the podcast. I have a company that I want to tell you about that I think you will definitely be interested in as a podcast listener. Family Sounds. Have you ever gone to a family reunion and traded stories and laughed with your relatives, and later you thought, gosh, I wish there was some way that we had a way to preserve those stories and preserve those memories when we're not face to face? Well, now you do with Family Sounds. Family Sounds can create an hour-long podcast that's just for you, that's just for your family, that tells the stories of your family and your relatives. And Family Sounds team, they're pros. They've done this before. They have lots of experience crafting stories for public broadcasting through radio and podcasts. They will use your family's voices as well as a professional narrator to tie the story together. Again, the name of the company is Family Sounds, and you can find them at family-sounds.com/books. Again, that is family-sounds.com/books. Family Sounds, your memories, your family in a podcast today. So check them out. family-sounds.com/books. Thanks for listening. Are you on a search for a special holiday or birthday gift for a reader in your life? A reader who loves history? Well, I've got a suggestion for you. How about giving them weekly historic letters in the mail from Letterjoy? Every week, they'll receive a letter from a famous historical figure or an eloquent eyewitness to a major event. Past Letterjoy letters have included famous defense attorneys, the United States and China, or working on the railroad, exploring the American history of the railroads. For example, one letter was an engineer writing home to his wife to describe the tough process of laying tracks for the Transcontinental Railroad. Every Letterjoy letter arrives at your door on fine stationery or parchment with a real stamp. And each letter also includes the postscript, an article by expert curators on the latest letter and the historical figures and events connected to it. Visit letterjoy.co to give weekly historic letters to the historian in your life. And I have a special offer for listeners of this podcast. Use promo code BOOKS at checkout to get $5 towards your first order. Again, That's letterjoy.co, promo code books, to give a special gift to the reader in your life. And what was your MFA experience like? I mean, obviously you came out of it with a novel, as you just said, but can you talk about how your MFA program was?
Yeah, I absolutely loved it. I'm somebody who does really well with structure. So it's like, here are the classes you take, you have your workshops. As somebody who's long been infatuated with reading and writing, to meet a bunch of other people who also had the same obsessions was really rewarding. The first couple semesters were certainly harder because I had never been in a workshop before. And so it's very intimidating to sit around a table and, have people look you in the eye and say, this is what's wrong with it. But again, having worked in, advertising, I found the feedback came in much more critical forms there. So I was quite used to, having X's drawn through my stuff and, scripts torn off the wall and things like that. So it wasn't so bad. It was just, it's when it's something you really care about, like I did with novel writing, you're certainly just a little more, on edge waiting for it.
And how did you get into advertising and copywriting?
In college, I majored in public relations. I had always been told that I was good at writing. And like I said, I just didn't really think that creative writing or novel writing was a realistic way to pay my rent. So the closest thing I could think of was advertising, writing TV spots, radio, digital, whatever. And so that was, for 7 or 8 years, that was what I did.
And I'm curious, I mean, you mentioned getting feedback and how with your advertising copy and how that related when you were doing workshopping. But I'm curious, did you see any kind of trying to think of how to articulate this, but did you take any of your copywriting secrets or things that you had learned into your novel writing?
Yeah, I think, it would probably be hard for me to articulate exactly how, but certainly economy of language is critical in advertising. Also dialogue, when you're writing TV or radio scripts, things that people are going to be performing out loud, you start to get an ear for dialogue, certainly. And so from a craft perspective, unquestionably learned a ton. And then, also from more of the psychological side of things, just learning how to take feedback on your work and not taking it so personally. Those were all great. It was great training ground for what would come with novel writing.
That's great. Well, have you started working on a new novel now?
I have, yeah. I've finished a first draft of my third novel, so you just keep churning them out.
Well, what writing advice would you offer for listeners who are working on their own stories and novels?
So from a more practical perspective, I would say making goals for yourself, whether it's, X words or just getting through, X scenes per day, week, month, whatever. Even if nobody else is holding you accountable at this point, holding yourself accountable, pretending that you have deadlines you have to reach, I think is the best way to actually get writing done. Because, I know from experience when nobody's waiting for it, it's easy to say, oh, well, I'll just do it. I have other work to do. I have family. I have this, but really prioritizing it. And then from a more, emotional standpoint, I think just remembering why you're doing it. It's easy when you're trying to get published to just become so focused on the actual getting published, getting the agent, querying, all of that. But I think if you always keep track or keep sight of the love of the writing and the process and improving at your craft, then that becomes more of a motivator to keep you going, even in the face of, repeated rejection.
Sure. Well, what novels have you read recently that you enjoyed?
Recently, I read A Head Full of Ghosts by Paul Tremblay, which is a horror novel. And I loved that so much. The voice in that is incredible. It's this sort of whimsical, eerie, young girl that's narrating. And anytime a genre can incorporate humor that's not typically thought of as funny, which is certainly horror, I'm always a big fan of that, which Tremblay does so well. And the book is also a really thoughtful analysis of the horror genre, which I've only, I'm not a huge horror reader by any stretch. So I found it, as sort of an outsider to it, very interesting to, he clearly has thought very deeply and immersed himself in both film and novels and all of that. So it was just an all around great read.
That's great. Well, where can people find you online if they'd like to learn more about you and your new novel, This Might Hurt?
My website is stephanieWrobel.com, and you can find all my social platforms and links to that stuff there as well.
That's great. Well, again, we've been speaking with Stephanie Wrobel, author of the new novel, This Might Hurt. The book is available now, so go buy a copy. And Stephanie, thanks for doing this interview.
Thanks so much for having me, Jeff.
That's great. Thanks a lot.
For too long, we've lived in a world of canceled and delayed. No more. Those plans you've been making, they're on. Thanks to OnGo, the #1 ranked at-home rapid COVID-19 test. So that vacation where you get to swim with the pigs, it's on. Your friend's wedding that was pushed back 4 times, it's on. The roar of the stadium, it's on too. OnGo, COVID-19 test results in minutes. OnGo is available at letsongo.com/radio and Amazon. This product has been authorized by the FDA during the public health emergency only, and only for the detection of proteins from SARS-CoV-2, not other viruses. The claim #1 ranked is supported by ECRI's usability evaluation conducted in December 2021.